Hello, everybody. Welcome to Good Morning, Good Night, episode 8. My name is Matt Demers. I'm here with my friend Will Chobra. This is a podcast where we talk about life, which seems like the most generic podcast description ever, but it's also a thing where we are looking at perspectives from ourselves, where we're working in esports. Both of us, me and Will, have a storied history in esports at this point. And just from the perspective of two people living, on opposite ends of the globe. Will's in Korea, I'm in Toronto. Normally we do this podcast during my morning and Will's night, but today we're actually doing it in a little reverse. It's 9:50 p.m. On my end, and Will is just in the morning. Good morning, Will. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing okay. We had to just kind of swap it up just for this week's, right? No, we would return to our normal schedule next week.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't feeling well yesterday, so we pushed it back a little bit. But how does it feel to record it in nighttime?
It's pretty decent. Like the thing is that it's different in the sense that my energy is usually different, depending on. I don't know. It's almost like I have more chances to tire out during the day. I'm not particularly tired right now.
Right.
I had some tea a little bit of maybe a couple hours ago, so I'm still kind of riding off that caffeine. But after years of not being a morning person, I'm starting to force myself to do more things in the mornings. And this podcast is one of those things where it's a good accountability thing, where I'm just trying to wake up at 8:30 and then get some breakfast, be ready for this podcast to start at 9:30. So, yeah, it's different on my end. It's like I'm working for a company now where I only really have about 3 hours in the morning. Like, say I wake up at 8:30, I only really have about 3 hours before people in the office that I work at, they go home at 5 p.m. their time. That's 6 hours ahead, I think. So I have until about 11 a.m. my time in order to talk to them and do tasks that are really time sensitive and need their input. So it's just funny. With EG and my previous gigs, I was just all over the place in terms of sleep schedule, and now it's oh wow, I now recognize why it's important to actually wake up the same time every day. It's crazy.
Well, there you go. Better now than never, right?
Yeah. Are you feeling any better?
Yeah, I am feeling better. I just had to catch a centipede. First thing in the morning.
Great.
As soon as I woke up.
Great.
That was not cool.
Great. Well, you have a dog, right? Does your dog
I do have a dog.
Mess around with bugs or anything like that? I know that's a weird way of putting it, but
I know what you mean. I've never witnessed her messing around with any bugs. Even when we're on walks, she's. I don't know if she just doesn't care. She doesn't seem scared about them from afar, but she also never seems to really be intrigued, right? Certain dogs, or especially obviously a lot of cats, have to touch everything and instigate everything. But
I think that's where that question came from, where I was oh no, I know friends who have cats that leave them mice or leave them bugs as presents, where they're here, I killed this, I'm a good cat, and they're well, yeah. Thanks, really appreciate this, didn't need this in my face.
So my dog actually, just a quick short story.
Yeah,
when she was a baby, I had taken her out for a walk at night, and then it was just a short walk, right, just to make sure she takes care of business before we go to sleep. So it's super dark, and so we just took a walk right in front of our house. Back then I was in upstate New York, and then I came back to the front door, and I knocked on the front door for my mom to open the door. And she opened it, and she immediately screamed. And I was what the heck? And I looked down, and my dog had a dead bird in her mouth.
Oh, no.
But, again, obviously, from a dog's perspective, she was,
super
proud of it.
Oh, yeah, totally. She's a hunter.
To wag off. Yeah. She didn't kill it, just so we're clear. She had just, picked it up. And so my mom's freaking out, and then so my dog immediately drops it because she's what's going on?
Yeah.
And then the next day, my mom took her to the vet. She was what if she contracted all these diseases? And they were just here, we'll just we'll just double check to see if any bacteria or viruses went through. No, it's fine. We'll just wash her mouth. And then they were yeah, just if she does it again, try not to scream first thing. I know it's kind of scary, but from a dog's perspective, they're just trying to do you proud.
Yeah, yeah.
They're like, yeah, like she was probably just super happy she found something.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, since then she hasn't like chased anything. But it's not like she doesn't ignore other life forms. You know what I mean?
Oh, no,
Like she's
totally.
super excited about meeting other dogs or cats or whatever. But yeah, bugs. Yeah, I don't know. Never have. But in the house, I think it's also just because like back then, both my mom and I, and then now, just like I've always just caught bugs as soon as I've seen them. So
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
she just never had the chance.
I hate house centipedes so much. They are the worst. They're creepy and just
it's been a
disgusting.
while. I haven't. In fact, I think the last centipede I saw in a house was in high school. That one was much bigger. That was in upstate New York. But then I saw one like in my place here in Seoul. Like as soon as I moved in, failed to catch it, and then it like hid somewhere, and then I assumed it disappeared. I think this is a new one because this one was kind of small. But yeah, it was not. It was on the ceiling, right? So like you wake up and you're like, what is that on the ceiling? And then you wear glasses and I wear glasses, so I'm like, my eyes are kind of blurry, and I was like, I think that's a centipede, but like I'm not sure. So then I put on my glasses and I was like, okay, that's like definitely a centipede. So
It's always funny that when you live in a place for a really long time, you suddenly notice every little thing that's out of whack. Like that's probably the only reason that I notice bugs is that you notice like a black spot on your wall that wasn't there before. And even if it's not like conscious, or even if it's something that you're not immediately like recognizing, it's almost like like have a mental map of like whatever's in your house, and every time something changes you're like, oh, what is that? Like what's different? And it's usually a bug or something like that. I don't know. I used to hate spiders, but as soon as I kind of like as soon as people were like, yeah, they eat other bugs in your house, it's like, okay, I can understand that now. I just hate centipedes. They just look disgusting, and they move in a very unnatural way.
Yeah, it is weird. There's also a daddy longlegs setting up a web in my house, and I'm wondering if I want to catch it or not because of that exact reason, but we'll see.
Well, I mean, you just put it in a cup and with the paper, and then you just let it outside, and that's plausible deniability enough. You just say, "I'm not gonna kill you."
There you go.
You can just set up somewhere else. Just set up somewhere else that isn't here. You don't have to go home. You just can't stay here.
There you go.
I don't know. This is we wanted to talk a little bit about today. I think we wanted to kind of take things away from the media stuff. Like we've as soon as Animal Crossing and Final Fantasy came out, our podcast topics have kind of like veered off into that because both of us are pretty into that kind of stuff. And I'm more laughing at seeing your stream schedule because you're going into Final Fantasy 8 after finish Final Fantasy 7. I'm like, oh God, Will's super
There's
into
no
it
going
now.
back.
There's no going back now. You got 8, 9, 10. You're not going to do 11 because that's an MMO, even though it's still running apparently. Like one of my friends, she streams playing Final Fantasy 11, and I'm like, wow.
Oh.
Like 14 is still like 14's there, and it's the new hotness, and it's more polished and stuff. But I imagine that more people probably like there can't be that many people playing it still. Like that game was on the PS2. Like
Oh, was it? Oh,
let's see,
gosh.
Final Fantasy XI.
Wow, that feels so ancient.
Final Fantasy XI, it's still going. It was released in May 16, 2002, so that game's 18 years old. For the PlayStation 2, Microsoft Windows, and it was the first MMO to offer cross-platform play. It was also the Xbox 360's first MMO. So all versions require a monthly subscription. So a mobile client for the game is under development apparently still. It's still going, like A+, 18 years of an MMO. Not many
That's pretty impressive.
Well, so it was launched in 2002. World of Warcraft was 2004, right?
Really? Wasn't
World of
Warcraft
Warcraft
also like 2002 or something?
World of Warcraft release for Australia and North America was November 23rd, 2004, because I remember being in high school.
Damn.
Yeah.
World of Warcraft actually the Final Fantasy 11 killer.
Well, shit, man. That was the funny thing. There were so many WoW killers, and it was the same vein as like all the Halo killers that came out. And like, I remember like
I love the
Age of Conan and Star Wars Galaxies and Lord of the Rings Online and Dungeons and Dragons Online.
I love the narrative. I
The
love
narrative of
the
Blank
WoW
Killer.
killer and the COD killer. Like every year, they're like, "This is
This
it," and
is
I'm
it.
like, "Aren't we kind of over that by now?" Like,
Well, it's the network. It's the network effect, right? And the thing is that like now we're starting to see game companies with such a big budget that they can just throw money at being the blank killer because they don't
Yeah.
need to. They don't need to rely on it. I don't want to say they don't need to rely on it being a good game. They just have fully grasped that the network effect is such a big part of
Yeah,
it that
yeah.
if your friends ain't playing it, you aren't going to play
Right.
it or stick around. So the companies
yeah.
realize that it isn't about, okay, well, we have to sell X amount of PS2 units in order for people to play. Let's just make it free to play and let's pull a Valorant. I wish I could have Riot's internal documents for how they marketed Valorant beta, because that would be amazing to read of like, okay, we're going to make it completely built on a Twitch economy. You know, there has to have been a decision there, or there has to have been some kind of partnership behind the doors, because like they didn't do it on Mixer and they didn't do it on YouTube. It's like, how do they
Right.
focus so hard on saying we're going to make an economy with Twitch drops? Because nothing's like done that big of a implementation of that system. You know, it's like, sure, there's
but
drops.
there's also not, but there's also not like a drop system on the other platforms yet, right? Or
Oh, no,
one
totally,
that's
yeah.
not native to them at least, right? You'd have to like do like third party stuff and whatever. So
I'm
I
more just
assume
amazed.
That's part of it.
I'm just more amazed that they leaned on it that hard. You know, like that's the entire launch strategy of their beta is another platform system.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's also just it was probably a decision based on the research behind Apex's launch success and then a bunch of other like
Yeah.
drop successes, right? Like Tarkov had that huge burst because
Yeah.
of the drops. And then other games that have existed for a while, right? Obviously, like Overwatch League used it for a while. And then
I always laugh when I
Rainbow
see
Six
Overwatch League,
had it.
like Overwatch League
Yeah,
icons.
We
I
won't
didn't
go into that rabbit hole.
I didn't watch a lot of it. It's more of every once in a while I see people with those Overwatch League 2018 badges and I'm like, how'd that work out for you? You know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yikes. Yeah. So anyway,
No, that's the funny thing is like, I don't know. The way for Twitch not to be stagnant is to offer more than just its base service. And that's why they wanted to do the whole like games distribution platform and stuff. But it's like, I'm not going to buy anything through the Twitch game store. It's just there to house all the games they give away for free. And to be fair, they give away a ton of like good games. You know, they give away a ton. I have a ton of games on there that I actually like would want to buy on Steam, but I'm like, no, I actually just got them for free because I have Prime. But it's interesting to see how they can, I don't want to say weaponize, but they can make it more attractive for outside parties to use their system because so many people just watch Twitch. It's ironic. The subject that we were going to talk about today was like getting away from being too online. And where do we go with our initial topics is things that require us to be completely online to like grasp as part of our jobs.
oh man.
I don't know. Like, I think I don't know if it's a maturity thing, and I don't know if it's an age thing. And so, for a little bit of background, me and Will just kind of toss around a couple of topics before we start. You know, usually on Monday or Sunday, and we usually aim to record on Tuesday. And you know, Will came up with it. You know, an idea of like, you know, what are off-screen hobbies and pastimes, and that's, you know, that's great, and I want to talk about that stuff. But what hit me about that was just thinking, man, I used to think that I couldn't afford to have hobbies. You know, I used to think that any time that I spent away from the computer or outside of social media or outside of like reading Reddit or my RSS feeds or like any time that I was away from the bubble of esports was opportunity for other people to get ahead of me or to miss stories or to miss what was like going on. And it was almost like an excuse that I used for myself to avoid getting out of a comfort zone where it was, oh, you know, it doesn't matter that I'm spending so much time on a computer all day because this is for work. And technically the more time I'm spending online, the more time, you know, that I'm going to be engrossed in the topics that I need to be. And the funny thing is that's poison. That sucks. You know,
Right.
That's something that isn't sustainable. And it took me picking up volleyball again to just be like, well, like the people that I'm meeting through volleyball are not people who are particularly online, and not all of them like know esports. And it's not like I'm talking about it. It's not like I'm talking about esports there. That's not what I'm there to do. I'm there to step away from the entire esports world and that person that I am, and almost put on a new pair of clothes and say, that Matt that I worry so much about doesn't exist here and doesn't need to exist here. The person that exists here is just here to play volleyball, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know? So I don't know if I wouldn't say we've both had that kind of drastic thing, but I imagine there has, like, we talked about FOMO and career FOMO and stuff like that in one of our first episodes. And it's almost like a variation on that theme, where it's like, you know, what point did you, Will, I guess I'm asking you, is like, did you ever have a point where you kind of had the same revelation where it was like, okay, I don't need to necessarily like be here all the time?
Well, so I think what's a little different is, I think probably with you, your main job revolving around social media, right? And then before that, news, where like, you're right, like you like that is your job, right? Is to be online. Like that's like the best way to simplify it, is to know everything and see everything, right? Whereas so I used to view things a little bit, I guess, on my end, just because of the kind of somewhat unique path I've taken, right, of like commentating, hosting, and then producing across different games. So I kind of spread myself thin. But for me, it was more a case of it was the age-old case of my hobby became my job.
Yeah.
And then, so as an example, for instance, right, I started with League of Legends. League of Legends becomes my job. Now I'm watching and playing League of Legends to research League of Legends. So it's hard for me to play League of Legends for like just for pure fun. Not that the game itself is inherently unfun now, but you know what I mean. Like, like now that every time I'm playing it, I'm thinking about like, oh, like item builds, or every time I'm watching, I'm thinking, okay, what are they doing? What's their strat? And then it became the same thing with TV shows, right? Once I started producing, I'm like, everything I watch, I'm like, oh, what are they doing? What's the host doing? I wonder how they wrote that, right? I wonder how many cameras they're using. And it's just, and so I started looking for things within both like media, so TV/movies, and then games where I could enjoy them not as a job. So for games, the easy answer was like single player games, right? And then TV shows, that's kind of why I ended up only watching Korean variety shows instead of anything else, because they're just there for like fun. But then the problem, you know, kind of resulted in the same way, where so now I spend, right, my hours in the office back then, and then I spend, you know, a couple extra hours on my own on like the games or whatever that do relate to my job. And then I have time left, and I'm like, well, okay, now I kind of want to finally enjoy these hobbies still as hobbies, but then now I don't have time to do anything offline, right? So that's when I felt it, because like I used to do a lot of different things, not online, or at least not related to gaming and or like video production, you know, whether it's like music. I used to like draw a lot, read a lot. I used to write a lot too. And I would say people that I've met within the past like 10 years would be like shocked to hear that. People are like, oh, like you used to draw? And I'm like, well, not like professionally, right? But just
as a hobby,
just for fun. Like I used to do like sketches. Like even as a kid, one of my like most prized possessions was sketching all the Pokemon, the original Pokemon, and things like that. Yeah. So, and everyone's like, oh, like you like drawing? And I'm like, why is this a shock? And then I think about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, because like I've never talked about it or shown it, because I just don't do it anymore, because I feel I don't have the time, because I'm like trying to, I guess, validate like gaming and TV as a hobby still. So it's a bit of a different angle, but yeah, I mean it hits you like once that initial, I guess, like drive kind of stabilizes, right? Because initially you're like, I gotta make it, right? I gotta make a stable salary, like whatever. And then you kind of stabilize, and reality hits you, and you're like, all I'm doing is this, all I'm talking about is this, and then you try to disconnect, but then you almost forget how to.
So I have a question kind of based on that. Is that just because is it easier to do, or is it dependent on security? Because I think that for a lot of us, we get that anxiety about having to always make something work or make something work for us when we don't necessarily have a secure job or something that we're like, we don't have that stress of always having to hustle. You know, it's like, it was a lot easier for me. Like, I think about this all the time, where when I was in high school or when I was in early university or even late university, I was always writing like freelance gigs, or I was writing for like free sites or whatever, just to get my portfolio in, just because I was hungry. And now that I think about it, like, I don't write as often anymore. And even this podcast was more of a project for me to just start creating again and not think too hard about it. Something that you really pinged about what you were saying there was taking things and feeling that you need to make them work for you, or like games that you're playing. Sorry, let me rephrase that. For me, I had a really problem for a long time, because if I was watching new stuff, or if I was playing new stuff, or if I was playing something especially competitive, I would think, how can I make content around this? Like, I couldn't just play Dota. I wanted to make content around Dota, because that's where I was spending my time anyway. So I don't know if that like, I have more to say on that, but I guess my original question is like, do you think that it's just harder or easier to do when you're like kind of in a position of like insecurity? It's like, you know, I'm not about to like ask about your finances or anything, because that's, you know, whatever. But at the same time, it's like, it's a lot. It puts a pressure on you to like work with what you have in your toolbox when you don't necessarily have a job.
Right. So, and I should put a disclaimer that...
Sorry, I know this is getting kind of personal. I didn't mean to...
No. I should put a disclaimer. I mean more in my personality of...
Oh, okay.
I'm like, I was brought up as an overachiever.
Ah,
right?
okay.
So the best way to put it is my grandma, my late grandma, used to always say, like, her life motto was, you can get through anything with a good mental, right? Like, you can get through anything with a good mental. And, you know, knowing what she had gone through, right? She had gone through like the war in Korea and things like that. Like, it makes sense, right? Because she had gone through so much. And so she would often say things when we were kids. She would often say things like, when you're studying, you should be focused so hard that even if a bomb drops right next to you, you don't notice. Like, that was like her life motto. It was like, with good focus, you can get through anything. And while I hated that as a kid, obviously, like, because that's just what I was told all the time. That's kind of where I get my overachieving and workaholic personality. So with that said, I think it's a weird, because you see that conversation a lot, right? People who have found stability and then get hit with this reality check, and then they overcome it, or they're still struggling with it. A lot of times the advice they'll give is like, make sure, you know, you still have something you love, or make sure your job is something you love. And these are all true. Like, it's not wrong advice, but at the same time, yeah, I think you're right, and that the reality is, depending on the field you choose, sometimes like the hustle is necessary. Does that mean it's healthy? Maybe not, but for that field, just the reality may be that it's necessary. And I think for esports, for even now, for most of the positions involved in esports, and obviously the business has grown and the industry has grown, so there's more opportunities. But for most of the positions that people immediately relate to esports, right? So whether it's like the player or team related stuff or the production related stuff, a hustle is required. I think that's just where it is right now, right? You can't just be like, oh, I'll just like graduate college and then send out
you can't do that in esports. That doesn't
applications
exist.
to different esports. Yeah, like, well, so anyone who approaches me, I always tell them, like, if they're in college, like, finish college for sure,
100%.
right? Especially given now that there's so many other opportunities. And I tell them, remember, now that the industry's bigger, like, you could, like, if you're studying accounting, you could apply for accounting and then learn more about the industry and, like, you know, transfer or grow from there, right? For instance, one of the producers I worked with, or at the time came in as an associate producer and then became a producer at ESL, that I hired, used to work in like HR, right? But they eventually got like exposed to more stuff that they did, voluntarily and stuff like that within esports, and then they transferred. That's all possible, but it's also not like, right? If you want to go into consulting, the path is pretty clear. Not to say that that's easier, but the path is much clearer, right?
Yeah.
It's much more apparent. Like you study this, you do internships, and then you send out 100 different applications to 100 different consulting companies, and then you hope that you break through that competition. Whereas esports, you're like, okay, I know of like 10 places I could send an application to based on what I want to find, but I don't really know where else to look, or I don't know if these smaller companies are somewhere I would want to work. I don't know if they're stable, right? Like none of that information is still really widespread. So yeah, I think a hustle is necessary, but it's just one of those things where, yeah, once you do find the stability, like I think it's something you have to be conscious about of what does that stability mean? And I think it's good to have a reality check, like as soon as you have a stable source of income, regardless of whether it's large or small, right? For whatever field. I think, and not to say that you have to change your mindset right there, but if you don't think about, okay, at this point, now that I'm stable, like how do I see it progressing, and how do I think I need to shift my gears, whether it's now or in the future? Because if you miss that point, then it will probably hit you harder later, where you're just in full overdrive all the time, and either you get burnt out, or you just forget how to do these other activities, or use your time elsewhere, and things like
totally.
that.
Like that hit me hard, and that has hit me hard, where it's the thought of, oh, what kind of person am I besides all this? It's and that's something that I've only recently started to build up, is the identity that's beyond my work. And I think a lot of people, especially if they're used to hustling all the time, their success in work, or at least what projects they're working on, are what they tend to lean on as their identity in general. And I'm definitely guilty of that. When I stopped working in journalism, and moved over to social media, before I moved over to social media, it took me a couple months to actually transition to doing that. But for those first couple months that I left to score, I had a huge fucking identity crisis, because I was sitting there like, oh man, I'm used to being a journalist. I'm used to being a public figure, even though I wasn't a big one. I'm used to being, doing all these different things and being present. And that also happened a little bit when I left EG, was the thought of, oh, I'm used to like participating at least by watching all these things and commenting on it, and at least being the voice behind the Twitter kind of thing. And then leaving that kind of stuff, it was on me to be able to kind of drag myself back and be like, okay, like what kind of person is Matt Demers besides these things that he's working on? And it took a really long time. And it was really difficult, because there are days where it's not just like a switch flicks. Like for some people, they can change gears like that, and they get excited about that kind of change and like what the possibilities are. But for me, I really struggled, because I didn't necessarily want to leave, but I knew it was unhealthy for me. So I don't know. I realized that also part of it is that so much of my online identity and so much of my presence online is tied to my real first name, last name. So it was difficult for me to, I've actually embraced for a lot of things now. I have completely like unrelated handles and like burner handles and stuff like that. It's not like I'm doing anything too shady or shady at all. too shady is the wrong wording there. But it's at the same time, it's like once you stop tying things to that, it's almost the thought, like I said, it's like I was playing Dota. I want to do content around Dota. Once you let go of the mind process that, oh, if I'm doing anything, I need to make it work for me and my online brand and make me money and be a positive net gain towards my career path, it becomes a lot easier to say, you know what, I'm just going to be a wrestling fan that doesn't have a handle on this board, or like a recognizable handle, just because I enjoy it, and I've made a big effort. Like I'm part of a separate Discord. I have a separate Discord account that's just for talking on a certain number of Discord, things, because my Discord is my username is my first name, last name. So like, I just don't want anything tied to it, because it's almost an exercise saying, I'm verified on Twitter. I know it means nothing, in most situations. Like, it's not like you should think about it as any kind of special treatment or anything like that. But it forces you to kind of just be like, okay, like, I'm not, especially with wrestling, and I know I bring it up a lot, but at the same time, it's not a very socially accepted hobby. It's becoming better because a lot more nerds are aging and realizing, okay, like, we all enjoy embarrassing things. So if you can talk about it with confidence, come on, man. It's like with Final Fantasy and stuff.
Just the way you phrase that.
No, I know.
It's funny because it's true.
Yeah, I mean, like, if we're still debating Tifa versus Eris in 2020, and it's all about the confidence that you bring to that conversation, right? It's if I can definitely go on this podcast, or I can speak in front of people that I would normally be embarrassed to talk about wrestling about. I know that there are angles that I can take with that conversation that sound confident and also sound like I'm making a decent case for it. And the person that is coming into that conversation already feeling insecure and feeling they're embarrassed to talk about it, or, oh, these people are going to think I'm a loser if I admit that I like this certain thing. It becomes a lot harder to just revel in it and to enjoy it for what it is. And that's what I liked about my trip to Japan. Most of my trip to Japan was based around two things: going to see this one company that I really like, a pro wrestling company. I went to 2 shows there. And the other half of it was I wanted to see as many things that I saw in the Yakuza series of video games. I wanted to see as many things as I could in Japan. And explaining that, like, in literal terms is a little embarrassing, because you like these things that are, it's almost like, oh, you saw this thing in a video game and that's influences you to travel. Like, oh, that's kind of weird, like, I don't know.
Which is really a dumb argument, because it's like people freaking go to see where Lord of the Rings was filmed.
Yeah, right? Good point. Maybe that's why.
But you're right. People still don't think of video games like as the same medium, right? They don't see it as the same escape.
Well, I mean, it's an age thing too. It's like if you're 30 and doing that, if you're 30 and going on a Lord of the Rings tour, it's like, it's a lot more attractive to say, oh, I wanted to go to New Zealand because I wanted to, see this landscape that had nothing to do with Lord of the Rings. Or I heard that this food was really good and I was really curious about it. I have a friend that, did a tour there. Those are a lot more socially acceptable ways of expressing a reason to go. Except like if you were going, if you're 30 and you're going to the UK in order to see where they filmed like Harry Potter stuff on set, which I don't think they did too many like on location things, but like, I don't know, that all comes down to your personal like insecurity about like the things you like. So that wasn't the point that I was trying to make. I'm more just saying that like, if you're purposely like, it's more of a symptom of the industry, and it's a symptom of a lot of different industries, whether it's trying to be a content creator or trying to be a streamer, a YouTuber, or make money off your personality. Even in a weird way, it's like, it's almost like a renaissance of like sex work is going on right now because of OnlyFans and like providing, parasocial relationships, or people who rely on Patreon income as like cosplayers and whatever. That's all building money and a product around your personality. And if you're always being made to think of your personality as a commodity, it makes it harder to do things that you don't view as a profit or like a way to grow that commodity, right? So for someone like that in my position anyway, like journalism is a personality-based industry. If you can bring as many readers as you can to a publication because you're more valuable and you can make more money. And it's the same thing as, in personality, like casters or, content creation in general. If you can command a certain amount of audience based on your personality and your own following, you can make more money. You can make personal sponsorships if you're a streamer or whatever. So if you're always looking at it in the way of how can I do whatever, like the things that I watch, the things I talk about, the things that I read, the food that I eat, the way that I work out, the hobbies that I do outside, if all of that has to come back around to being a net positive to your commodity that is yourself, it makes it harder to just enjoy things for what they are.
Yeah, because you're always thinking of it as a tool or a business or whatever, right? Depending on the situation.
I mean, the ironic thing is that
taking it as a face value.
Yeah, the ironic thing is that usually means that you're going to fail at it. Like, the only reason I tried to do this thing with Dota a couple years ago where I called it Better Dota. And basically it wasn't the goal of being immortal or being pro. It was just an idea that I had, and I pitched it to my dad. I was like, my dad's a runner. My dad does triathlons and stuff like that.
Okay.
And I was just like, imagine you could subscribe from day one of someone's journey they've never ran before to their first 5K. Imagine if that you got updates every day, or every time they went on a run, or every time that they failed, or every time they practiced. That's an intriguing story because it matters to you, and it's probably situations that you have gone through yourself. So you can find an emotional attachment to that. You can sympathize with that person's journey, and you can cheer them on, and that makes you want to invest, yourself into that product. I thought I could do that with Dota, and that's a decent pitch for almost anything. It's a very easy way of making a storyline around yourself. The thing is that I didn't want to play Dota beyond the scope of that project. I didn't necessarily I enjoyed Dota, but I didn't enjoy it so much that I really wanted to play it in order to get better. So every time that I did play Dota, it was in service of the project. It wasn't, I already like playing Dota, let's make a project around it. It's, I can see a project around it, so let's play Dota in order to execute it. And because of that, it's like, it worked for a little bit. It worked for about, like, I think that the shelf life for the way of treating it like that, the shelf life is only as long as you get good response for it. And,
right.
I did actually get a good response for it for a couple of weeks. It's like people thought the idea was good. And, like Purge, and Purge brought it up, in a conversation or a podcast or a stream or something like that. And like, I definitely did get on like at least one podcast talking about it. But the thing is that if it's so motivational by that building up of a commodity, if you can see a future in it and say, okay, I can kind of do something with this Better Dota thing, if that's what's fueling your interest in the project, that's not going to last forever. And especially if you don't like the base thing, it's like, okay, then you start to resent Dota. You start to hate every minute that you're playing it because you're realizing, oh shit, if I don't improve, if I don't build a good narrative for this thing that I'm trying to build, or if I get 3K MMR and then I lose like 500 and I don't have a good way of framing that narratively, you're worrying like, oh God, how am I going to make this work for the project? Or are people going to think I suck? Or what if I don't actually improve? What if that 3000 MMR is the cap, or how high I can, grow? So it kind of, to bring this back around, when you have bad motivations for doing things, I don't want to say bad motivations, but flawed motivations, it affects your ability to just enjoy it and turn yourself off and actually enjoy things. And in that vein, that's why I like wrestling, is because it's not something that I'm going to want to make content around. That's why I like volleyball, is that I know I'm not going pro in volleyball. I'm 30. I'm way too old. I'm 30. I'm 6'3", which is actually like on the shorter end for volleyball. And
really,
for pro volleyball, these guys are all like 6'7", like maybe you're playing, like there's one defensive position in volleyball that you can't attack with. It's called the libero, and you're in the back row.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they added this actually. This is the thing that I'm actually like really fascinated about, is they added this position in like 98. Like, think of how old volleyball is, and they added a new position in like 98 called the libero. And
so that person can't ever hit it over the net?
That person cannot attack. They can't attack. So the thing is that like what's unique about them is that they can sub in and out freely. So if you're serving, like say your team is attacking and serving, that libero can leave the court in exchange for someone else that's an attacking player. And when you're receiving the ball, that person can come back in. So their job is just to play defense.
Wow.
And it's interesting because you can only switch with one person per match. Like, you have to designate, this is the person that I'm always going to be switching out with. And it doesn't count towards the substitution limit, but that person in the back row can't attack.
Gotcha.
They can set the ball if they're behind a certain line, but
Jeez.
but it's a very like contentious position. It's you don't have to be tall because you can't block, you can't spike, and you're not rotating to the front. So short people can play that role. But
I see.
But like I know I'm not muscular, you know, I'm not fit, I'm not very and the time it would take me to get to a pro volleyball level, it's Canada. We don't have a good system for it. Like as an adult, I can't learn the fundamental skills that I missed by not getting coached at an elementary and high school level, because there's no adult classes in order to get better, you know, in order to actually learn. So with that in mind, those two things, I made my peace with it. I was just like, I like volleyball for what it is. I like playing with people and getting better on my own terms, but I'm not going to make content around it. I'm not going to... The analogy is like fighting games. Fighting games has the exact same process. The only difference is I know I could maybe make content around it in the same way I did that Dota project. So when I try to start learning fighting games, I psych myself out again. I start stressing. I start, you know, not enjoying the actual process of playing the game, because there's that pressure of what can you do with this? How can you use this in order to make yourself more money or put yourself in a more stable position in terms of work options or career options, whatever. But with volleyball and with wrestling, I know I'm not going to do that with either of those things. And I almost have to force myself to acknowledge that and be comfortable with it, because it's necessary. You have to have hobbies that act like that, or else you will just continue to burn yourself out. You will burn yourself out and hate the things that you're burning yourself out on, and just go through them in a giant list. You'll be like, well, I love Dota. Now I don't love Dota anymore. I loved streaming. Now I hate streaming. You know, it's the tragedy. It's the, oh, I really love this thing. And now I hate it. I can't bear to look at it. You know,
it's funny you mentioned that. So obviously, for those who have ever been involved in esports, even in a remote sense, burnout is like an everyday topic, right?
Yeah.
You see people getting burnt out. Like I've seen people basically leave the scene simply because of burnout. You know, I've had people talk to me about burnout. And I used to always say, I think the only reason I didn't get burnt out early on, despite the path I took, right? Because I took like the whole commentary, translating, and then like hosting, and then like in a different country. Well, obviously for me, not like a completely foreign country, but Korea, was purely based on the fact that like I always saw the path I wanted to take within esports in two different channels, right? One with like gaming, and then one with production, right? Content production. And to me, it was they never conjoined as esports. And some esports purists will say that's blasphemy, but you know, whatever. But like for me, it was never really about esports. It was about, I like video games, and then I really like and want to learn more about content production. And so whenever I would get burnt out on the, say, gaming end, right, especially back then, like simply working on pretty much only League of Legends in Korea, like sometimes you just get burnt out, right? Sometimes I was like, I like can't play this game anymore. I'll watch it because it's my job, but like I'm not like looking up more content, right? I'm not looking up all these other like theory crafts from other content creators.
Yeah.
For some time. But that's okay, because then this other channel I have of content production of, you know, whether it's working on some content with the team at OGN or whether it's just watching them, you know, prepping and producing the live show, like that kicks in. And then when I get burnt out from that and the schedule and having to stay overnight to edit stuff or add subtitles, I like hate it. But then I'm like, hey, you want to play on ARAM and like, or like play some Summoner's Rift with coworkers or friends, and then like the gaming part kind of lets me, like, I can enjoy that now because I'm actually like too skewed to the production end, right? So because I used to always look at it as two separate, I guess, quote unquote hobbies, I think that's what allowed me to not burn out despite the ridiculous schedule plus just my own personality of overworking that I had, I would say, from my OGN days to like the beginning of my ESL days. Like at OGN, like I consistently either slept at the office or, just like came home to take a shower and then go back to work. You know what I mean? And that was partly because of the number of things that was there to do. But OGN wasn't like ordering me to do it. I mean, I was there as basically a contractor / freelancer, so they couldn't. But I just saw these things that needed to get done, and I was like, well, I'll do it. But then once I say it, obviously they expect me to do it, so I'm like, okay, well now I need to like stay up. And for under any other normal circumstance, that would have definitely created burnout because I lost any sense of hobbies, right? Because I had been. That was a year after, like I joined OGN a year after I left school. So any sense of like schedule and social normalcy had been thrown out the window, right? And then I hadn't been doing anything other than like esports and League of Legends for a year plus. And like after a year of that, you would definitely get burnt out. But just because I saw my work in two different avenues, I think they always ended up kind of balancing each other out. And then over time, as my career has kind of evolved into a broader spectrum, then I kind of got back to the reality of, okay, I also like, I want to rediscover, other things. So for a while in LA, it was going to karaoke with my friends, to Norabangs in K-Town. That's what we call them in Korean. 'Cause like I used to love singing. I used to also just love going to karaoke and like singing my favorite songs and hanging out with friends. And so that was like kind of one of those mini hobbies. And people were like, "Oh my God, like you like to go out and like party?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not like I literally just want to go sing. Like I don't care if you drink. Like I don't care if you're there to party. I'm just gonna sing." Like, and so it was one of those things where over time I was also hit with that reality check, but because I looked at my job in more than one ways, whereas I think a lot of people enter esports as like esports, right? They're like, I'm passionate for esports and I want to make the best esport and I want to make the best tournament or play in the best tournament. And then I mean, I guess as a player, it is like you only really have that one direction. But for other roles, then you get burned out because this industry is still very much. It's still a very much of a hustle competition, both at a large scale and a small scale, right? Both at a brand and business scale, which I guess is technically true at the top anywhere, but then also at the individual level, there's still just so many positions are still based on contract and freelancing.
Yeah.
Which, freelancing in any field is going to feel like that, right? Because in your head, you're always like, well, if this other person does work for one more hour or prepares for one more hour, like who's going to stop that, right?
I definitely recognize what you were saying about just like it's not like the company told you that you had to do it, and it's not like there was like an implicit like, oh, you should, like, suggestion that you would like not have work if you didn't do those things. But there's this weird feeling that, especially with contract workers, and since esports is almost all contractors, it's very hard to shake, where especially if you're just new, you have to make yourself valuable. You have to justify your own existence, and you have to basically just be like, okay, well, if I see a problem that I can handle, even if it's not in the scope of the project, you feel like you have to take it on, or you have to like make it something that you can distinguish yourself with. You can make yourself stand out, and you can make yourself valuable to the company, so that when the time comes to rehire you or not, you can get rehired. And maybe that's projecting a little bit. Like I definitely know that I'm that type of person. I'm that type of person that I end up burned out because I feel it's a personal pride thing. And it's also a thing where if I can make myself valuable to a company, it eases my anxiety that they're just going to like eventually not see me as valuable and make me leave, or not make me leave, but like, not renew anything or whatever, or,
Sure.
Because both of us, I think, have worked with employees or coworkers or people under us that they seem that they're very confident to work just to the letter of their contract, where anything that's, past their, outside of the scope, they're just like, nope, sorry, not my job, not in my job description. And the thing is that we are very, on one side of things, it's very easy to resent those people because you think it and you're just like, man, everyone's busting our asses and we're all in this together, and it's all one big, family, and we're like, we're all suffering together, gallows humor kind of thing. We're all in the trenches together, and this one person isn't willing to go above and beyond, or not willing to help everyone else when I'm busting my ass too. And the thing is, that's kind of a selfish way of looking at it, because just because another person is really good at establishing boundaries and standing up for themselves doesn't mean that, and you're not, doesn't mean that they should all of a sudden start suffering just because you can't stand up for yourself, So it's a very sobering way of looking at it. You have to be able to be self-aware enough to realize that, okay, no, this is my problem. This isn't theirs, and then kind of see where it takes you from there. If you're looking, it's much easier to blame that coworker than blame yourself. And it's a lot easier to blame that coworker than taking the steps to enforce boundaries, especially if you're the type of person that has already built something up for yourself, like poor boundaries up for yourself. So I don't know. It's
actually so I've had several conversations with multiple different like producers and then production managers that I've talked with and worked with at ESL, since obviously at ESL we also worked with a bunch of different contractors, and also later on we brought on a lot of people from not necessarily direct esports backgrounds to work on different projects, and a lot of these people had just way more experience within the production field, and something that came to light was while it's one of those it's something that's hard to teach by just in words, because you do want to hustle when you're starting off, especially if it's something you're passionate about, right? If you're okay with just settling, that's a whole different conversation where that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're passionate and you want to get to you want to basically get higher, right, in that field, you do want to hustle. But if you, like you said, don't set those boundaries early, what happens is then as you go further up, where now you are in a position of responsibility of helping establish those boundaries, right, and respecting them, you don't know how to, because to you it's like that's not necessary, right? This is how it's done, because I went through whatever path, and this is how I created it, where I often had some of those veterans tell me it's so they would always say it's a double-edged sword, because I look at it as so obviously, again, like I've talked about, I used to like sleep at the office and whatever, but I never want anyone else to have to go through that. You know what I mean? Like I did that because I felt the need, but it shouldn't be a necessity for the project or the company to survive.
Oh yeah, totally.
So then a lot of times I would send, once I became a producer, like I would send people home once they're, whether if they were contractors or even if they were full-time, I'd be like, go home now. If it needs to get done by tomorrow, and whether, we're late because of our own mistakes or whatever, like I will finish it. And so the good news was I was respecting it for others, but at the end of the day, like I'm still killing myself, right? Because I'm sitting there like, you're taking on the slack. And I'm going to stay over at the office, or I'm going to come back into the office like overnight. And whatever, and they would always say it's good that you're able to see that you need to respect that for others, but at the end of the day, like if you don't learn why that's important inherently, like you'll actually just burn yourself out, which is true. And so I think it's one of those things where at that point I started learning about how I want to spend my time away from the office, right? And so I continued to, well, I've always said I never want to live too close to an office if I'm ever working anywhere full time, because knowing my personality, I'll just stay at the office. But
that happened to the score. I was a 5-minute walk away from the score. And the thing was, is for me, I was just like, I would rather pay money and be able to roll out of bed and then go walk there and not have to like do an hour commute from like where I live now to Toronto or whatever. I liked having my sleep, but like you said, it just creates poor boundaries.
Yeah. So, but at that point I started, if I had other arrangements, right? Whether it was like, let's say I had a social arrangement, right? I decided to have like dinner with some friends and just hang out. Unless it was a actual emergency, I would be like, if anything came up at work, I'd be like, I'm going to do that tomorrow. Cause like I said, I'm not going to tell them I'm going to be late. I'm just going to go because it's not going to ruin everything. It's a weird balance to learn, because sometimes, you know what, like sometimes life does suck and an emergency happens, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes something just goes wrong with the client or whatever, or your computer just like blows up and you have to restart, and it sucks. And those times you need to learn to just accept it, and then like quote, I guess, somewhat like overwork that one day. But then obviously those around you or those above you in that workplace should also recognize and support that, and kind of like help balance it out later.
Yeah.
But in the heat of the moment, sometimes you need to overwork, but also you need to start recognizing the equation and formula, and the only way you can properly assess the priority is if you have experience on both sides of both the work side, but then the non-work side. And I think that's why it's important to have hobbies. I think when people simply throw the life advice around of, hey, like, make sure you have a hobby, or make sure you spend time with your friends, it's really hard to understand. Like, if for someone who's currently hustling, right, or like going into a new field, changing fields, whatever, like growing a dream, it's hard to understand that other than from the perspective of, it obviously sounds like good life advice, but otherwise, like, what does that mean for me?
Oh yeah, totally.
But then when you quantify it as, yeah, but if you don't like experience it to varying degrees, both in a small scale and then sometimes maybe even overdoing it and making mistakes, right, of like prioritizing it too much, not that you have to, but sometimes going overboard can be a lesson in, okay, so now I know when the time comes when I really need to make that boundary for myself of, oh, this is a situation where like, nope, I'm going to prioritize this promise I kept with my friends or family or whatever. And then this is a time where I need to, tell them that I can't make it, or, I'm going to be late, or I got to tell myself like today I'm going to lose sleep. But that's now understood and respected because I've also respected that boundary other times. And I think that's the important part of, try to make sure you're always keeping or discovering a hobby or spending time on your own or getting enough sleep. It's all those things where, again, if you don't do it on the regular, how will you ever know when you're not doing it?
It's a funny thing where it's like, for me, I when I read, I have like two modes. It's manga and it's self-help books. And the self-help books that I hate the most are the ones that are just a collection of anecdotes. It's just a collection of people. Usually it's famous people, and it's usually people who, they're ignorant of the own like context that their stories have, where they're just like, oh, I did this and met this person and we talked about this, and then they expect you to get some wisdom from that. It's almost like, what I hate about those is that I almost want them to say what their point is directly, so to at least be able to communicate it. And like you were saying, you can have hobbies, but to hear other people to be like, no, the reason you have hobbies is you need to be able to downshift from like the hustle, and you have to have things that keep you in perspective, and you have to have situations that force you to interact with people outside of your bubble, and you have to have forced situations that, people who have no idea who you are, say you have like 500,000 followers on Twitter or something, you definitely want to seek out situations that people who don't know who you are, because they treat you like a normal person, and they keep that humility, and they keep that kind of, humbleness, again, humility, flowing. So you don't kind of get too caught up with who you are to people online. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's really practical advice. And I think that it's almost another entire podcast topic to talk about that fight that we both have of not wanting to make it as bad as we had, but also realizing that the situations that we had to go through and the struggles that we had shaped us into the type of people that we are now. And having people completely ignore those or skip over them definitely makes it lacking a little bit in some areas. For me, when I was hiring people at EG, I wanted people who had not worked for free, but had at least experienced the struggle of working for shit contracts or terrible organizations or whatever, so that, not necessarily to carrot on a stick them. I didn't want to just be like, give them something marginally better and say, hey, you should be happy. It's no, I want to be your mentor. I want to make it so that you can serve, like, even if you don't stay at EG long, I want to make sure that you can get a better job coming out of it than you did coming in. and I also want to be able to pay you better or get you benefits or stuff that's really hard to get in our industry. But I also want you to come into this position with your own humility about it and realize that if I'm going to put my ass on the line and struggle to make things better for you, I want you to appreciate that because you've experienced worse. You know, the worst is when esports grows big enough that people can go straight from university without having volunteered or struggled at an esports job or volunteer position. The worst, it's going to be a big shift. I don't know if it'll be worse because maybe it'll be better, but it'll be very different when people can just go straight from university with those qualifications and get full-time work in esports, because they're going to lose a lot of the context and they're going to lose a lot of the humility that comes with just doing it for the love and then eventually being able to stand up for yourself. But like we said, there's two sides of it.
Yeah. I stand on the slightly other side of that. Like I think it only becomes a problem when people make it a problem, right? Because the way I see it is, if that was a problem, it should be a problem in every field. You know what I mean? Like it should be a problem in investment banking. It should be a problem, wherever. But it's not, right? Because it becomes, well, it is in some fields actually still, but like it's not, because it just depends on the individual, right? If they take it for granted, then it's a problem
with them. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, with any place, right? Even if you're working at a, part-time at a grocery store, if you just take it for granted, your attitude's not helpful. It's just that there's so many grocery stores and so many positions at a grocery store that one individual isn't impacting a shockwave of bad attitudes. But I would say that's more of an individual thing. I know what point you're trying to I do know what point you're trying to make, in that it's generally you have a higher chance of not having a bad attitude if you've had to go through worse, right? Because your standards are now different.
We don't really want to force people to go through worse.
But right, it's a way of, let's find a different way to educate them on good standards, rather than like have everyone go through shit standards. So now you learn it firsthand. So it's one of those where I think it's like a square and a rectangle, right? Yes, if you go through harder times, you have a higher chance of now having a broader perspective. But is that necessary? No. You just now need to shift the system so that they learn it in other indirect ways.
I insist that we come back to this topic, but not on this episode.
Yeah, no,
this is a topic where I think both of us we largely wing these episodes where we just have a line or two of topic, but that's one where I want us to come to the table with points. I want us to have notebooks, and just be like, this is my position, and we're going to talk that out. But where people can find you on the internet? What are you up to this week, Will?
You can find me on Twitter, Twitch. You can find me on Instagram, although I'm not very active. All at /Will Chobra, so that's WILLCHOBRA. I also have a community Discord, but I don't have a vanity URL, so you can find that on my Twitter. It's on the pinned tweet, so it should be pretty easy to find, or on my Twitch channel as well. So the Discord's it's mostly for my content, right? I would still interact with broader topics and stuff on Twitter. The Discord is mostly for my content and regular updates, and then for people who regularly interact with that to come in and hang out and share thoughts. And also we have a lot of people interested in Korean culture and things like that. So if that's something that interests you, you can find a place to discuss, whether it's just K-pop, Korean food, or just traveling.
I saw the channel. You have a study Korean English.
Yeah,
study
there's some people
too.
Have questions about language and stuff as well. So obviously that being a huge part of my life, kind of set that up. But yeah, you can find me on those platforms. In terms of what I'm up to, I actually have a couple. I did have a screen test for a couple of different projects this week. We had to postpone them, but if those go through, hopefully I'll be able to share some news for the summer on different content rather than just my regular day-to-day stream. But otherwise, day-to-day streams, and if big esports stuff is happening, you'll see me talking about it on Twitter.
Awesome. And Final Fantasy, a lot of Final Fantasy.
A lot of Final Fantasy.
I want to shout out that one guy on Twitter. I forget his name, Fernando. Excuse me, where he was just we said that we weren't going to talk about Final Fantasy stuff, and then he was press X to doubt, and I'm like, we did it. We didn't talk specifically about it. We tied a little bit onto it, but after last week, I had a little bit of a weird mental crisis where I was explaining how to like spell my last name, and I was like super insecure about it because I was like, I hate it's hard to say audibly. Like, it's not the worst last name in the world. It's not like a Polish last name where you've got a bunch of C's and S's and Z's everywhere. But at the same time, when I say Matt Demers, it's kind of interesting. My family is split Anglo and French, and technically it's a very French last name. It's Demers, and but there's no accepted pronunciation. Like, it's not like my parents made a decision. Like, my parents and my family are like my immediate family are very Anglo, but we have a lot of French people in our family, and they'll pronounce it the French way. And there's 10 different ways to pronounce it in English with different like inflections and whatever. Like, I'll go Demers or Demers or Demers. Like, I don't have an accepted, like, a mental like go-to for the pronunciation. So I got a little weird about that, and I was just like, oh, we need to fix this. And it's nothing to fix. Like, I made a poll on Twitter that was like, should I just like abandon everything and just get a handle? And like 92% of people were like, no, just keep it, idiot. So I remedied it, and I bought a domain that's mattd.cc, and that goes to all my relevant links.
Okay.
There's a site called Linktree where you just build a bunch of, like, it's just a bunch of buttons that are labeled Twitter, Twitch, that kind of stuff. So if you go to mattd.cc, you can see all my relevant links and all that stuff. And I guess plugging the podcast itself, gmncast.com. We have threads for all of our episodes on reddit.com/r/gmncast. And we're usually recording live on every Tuesday, and usually the podcast itself is out Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on when we get to it. So thank you guys for watching. Will, I hope you have a good morning and a good rest of day.
Thank you, and I hope you have a good night.
Awesome. Thank you. We will see you guys next week.